All right, welcome back, everyone. We're
Good
on.
morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to give a little brief bio so people know where you're coming from, and then we'll get started. So, Patricia Kaminski has been a co-director with her husband, Richard Katz, of the Flower Essence Society since 1980. Through the society, they continue to inspire flower essence community throughout the world. They're both authors of numerous articles and books about flower essences, and they manage the Flower Essence Services, which produces flower essences and herbal products at Tierra Flora, their 27-acre biodynamic garden and wildlife sanctuary in the northern Sierra foothills of Nevada City in California. What a wonderful service the FES does. I have some of your things right on my desk here. So wonderful to have you here. So today, I just wanted to start like I was with other folks. How did you begin to work with the land? What brought you to that connection?
Well, I would say that the land has always been there. I was thinking back, my first memory, and I must have been around 3 years old, was my father plowing a field. And I have a March birthday, so it might have even been my birthday, but there was this wonderful smell coming from the earth. And I remember seeing an earthworm, and I remember birds singing. And there was this overwhelming feeling of belonging and of joy
Yeah.
and connectedness. It all went together. My father, the land, the birds, the worm, the sun. And for me, land is synonymous with home. So it has, and then of course, I grew up on a farm, a 1,000-acre farm, but we always said we were dirt poor and land rich, uh, because we didn't have a lot of money, but actually that was fortunate. For instance, my dad gave me an old corn crib, and that was my playhouse. I didn't have toys. We had very few toys that you went to a store and bought. I would make mud pies and corn husk dolls and anything, that I could sort of imagine. We sewed our own clothes. We grew most of our own food, and what food we didn't grow was available in the community. So uh, for me, living life itself is part of the land. As I grew up older, I had a horse. Actually, I had two horses, Rocky and Prince, over the course of time. And I used to just ride the horse through the prairie. I would also bring the cows home. And then I became the main cow woman. And by the time I was a teenager, I really did take care of our dairy
Wow.
and our dairy animals and also the chickens. We grew a garden. So it was the whole enchilada. It was just a Polish Catholic sort of background to it. But a lot of what is in biodynamics is, for me, common sense. But as my grandfather used to say, common sense is not all that common.
Right.
And so, but a lot of what Steiner brought forward in biodynamics is really a lot of old wisdom. And so
Yeah.
that was already in my blood, a certain aspect of it. So anyway, that's how I would say the land came to me. I'm not sure that I ever, it was just integrated into
Started there.
everything. So
Yeah, beautiful. So as you say, Steiner really did pull a lot from those traditional cultures with biodynamics. When did that become a little bit more of a conceptual thing about biodynamics? Did you come across the
well,
agricultural course?
that's a very powerful story. What happened, so I went to the University of Nebraska, and then I had a job working at the Nebraska legislature for one of the senators. But I also was really involved in a lot of social work, a lot of social justice and change. I helped found the first food co-op there, that kind of thing. Anyway, even then, I saw that our rural communities were dying. And I was instrumental, a couple other people, in organizing a conference that was trying to bring rural communities back into, I would say, culture and soul and the kinds of things I grew up with, really. And one of the guest speakers, which I was the one who had asked Wendell Berry, can you come? And
Nice.
so he did come, beautiful, beautiful man.
Yeah.
Bringing the poetry, bringing the stories, bringing also, he's a farmer. So he was so wonderful. And then he had a free day. And so after the conference, I said, yeah, let's go to Boys Town. And that's outside, that was a wonderful farm outside Omaha, Nebraska. And so when we brought, so I was with Bob Stephan, and I did not know, but Bob Stephan was one of the people holding the Biodynamic organization in those years, and also had brought Biodynamics to Boys Town. And so when we got there to give Wendell Berry a tour, and it was also new for me, I hadn't been there, we came across a compost pile. And for me, this compost pile was so alive that I actually heard, now I know what I heard. I actually heard the etheric world. I heard tones coming out of the pile. And it was so overwhelming to me. I grew up with things like silage piles and dung heaps, but I had no idea what this was. I didn't have any preconceived notion. I only knew what I felt, and it was so overwhelming. At first, I thought I was having a nervous breakdown, actually, because my nickname was Patricia Kaminski, and I always was on fire. And so I said to Wendell and Bob, you two just go on walking. I need to sit here. And when they came back, I said to Bob, what is this? I said, this is so alive. And he said, that's a compost pile. But I said, it can't be. It's something else. Why is it so alive? And he said, well, for that, you'll have to study biodynamics and read Rudolf Steiner. But he didn't give me any other clue. And I remember the next morning I got on my bike and drove at top speed at 8 a.m. in the morning to go to a bookstore to find Rudolf Steiner. But at that time, there was not one book. There was nothing on biodynamics. So it took me a while. But that's how I encountered it. I always say that I heard Rudolf Steiner's name for the first time by a compost pile and because of a compost pile. So
How
that's my story.
appropriate. Wow, how
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, it can be
And
a
the rest
challenge
is
being
history. What?
it can be a challenge being so sensitive, but you pick up things, right?
Well, I'm a
Yeah.
kind of a interesting combination of fire and water. So I'm very sensitive, but I'm also, I have to work on my astral body all the time, I mean, because I've got a lot of fire, which means you have a lot of ego. But I hope as I've matured, I brought those together. But yeah, I'm on fire all the time. I'm really somebody who cares a lot about anything I do.
Yeah, well, that's clear. Well, you're going to share today with us celebrating the four seasons in biodynamic practice, weaving sense, substance, and spirit. Do you have slides
Exactly.
you'd like to share with us? Share
Oh
with
my
us?
goodness, yes.
Great. Well, feel free to get those set up. I'm going to
Yeah.
configure things on my end.
Yeah, I tend to be slide rich. So we're going to slide into this. Um, and
Excellent.
one of the reasons I like to do a lot of slides too is that I know you record your sessions. And
Mhm.
that way, if people want to go back, they can also get a certain amount of information uh, from the slides themselves.
Absolutely.
So let
So
me just
I know
start
we
with,
wanted to do a little break in the middle, so you let me know when you want to do that break, and
okay, yeah,
I'll,
we'll go for an hour and then we can just take like 15-minute break or so.
sounds good. Great. Take it away.
Okay, let's roll. I wanted to start with, let's see, whoops. Okay, there we go. I wanted to start, this is one of our guys doing a compost pile, but I wanted to start with two, for me, leitmotif quotes that kind of inspire what I'm going to be saying. And the first is that one's moral constitution affects practical results. That's putting that's how Steiner would say it. The egg and chicken question, which one comes first? But he says the moral constitution affects the practical results. The laboratory table must first become an altar. That there really needs to be something devotional and deeper in our work. The other quote is from the agriculture course itself, where he said, the mere intellect will not be enough. It does not lead us deep enough. So with that being said, let's just go into content. I wanted to start with a picture of the earth. This is the glyph that we've decided as humanity is the symbol of the earth. And I think it's so beautiful to just, the symbol of the earth is a circle and a cross. And so that fourfoldness in the earth is there. And yet I will also say that in the agriculture course and in many other teachings from Rudolf Steiner, there's also a threefoldness. So I just want to go ahead and enunciate that as well, that we have for the earth herself, the salt crystal, we all stand on this solid ground that would be called the salt or the crystal reality of the earth. This also is primary alchemy, that this middle place is the mercury. And I'm not talking about mercury as an element right now. This is the alchemical idea of mercury as the being, as the weaver, as the one who connects. And then you have in the heights, the sulfur process, the fire process. So that's a basic idea of Earth herself, if we think of her as a trinity. But we also want to think of her as a fourfoldness, because our real reality when we stand here on Earth is we're not in the heights or the depths of her being, in her hydrosphere, atmosphere, nor do we live under her. We can't physically. We stand on her. So we really stand in this middle position. And so this is something that is so primordial to our psychology of being human. We just forget perhaps that that's it. We're standing on the earth. And so we really experience her then in these descending and ascending forces. So there's a really, our experience of the earth is that there's a horizon, and that there's a sky, and there's the solid ground we stand on, and then whatever's underneath of it. So in that sense, we're fourfold beings as we live on earth. And now, So then we can begin to see, as we build up this picture, that we have the salt crystal process, which also belongs to the winter and to the earth element, the spring, the water element, because everything then starts to really flow out of the winter mood. And I'll be talking more about that. And then the sulfur process, that is really summer, the fire. And then we have the autumn, the air element. And so then if we're thinking that way, we can introduce, and oh, I see that I put Uriel already in the summer in the other one. So we just need to remember that Uriel is here. But this process, I then am going to be talking about the four beings that live in this. And I'm not, by the way, when I'm going to be talking about these beings, I'm not talking about religion per se. And it's fine if you have a religion. I'm talking about starting to be able to feel and sense these beings just as if you walked into a room and I was there, and maybe I had built the room or was the one maintaining the room, you would recognize me as integral to the room. You would pay homage to me. You would see me. And so what I want us to do, and what Steiner was doing especially in the last years of his life, is bringing us through the medical work, through the biodynamic work, through many of the lectures that he gave, the one that Alex mentioned, which I love, called The Symphony of the Creative Word, the biodynamic lectures, several lectures on the seasons. All of these lectures are to help us begin to actually see in the world we live in, even if we're not clairvoyant yet, to begin to feel that we're not just talking about an abstraction of the seasons, we're talking about real beings that live in these processes. So we're going to be talking about Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, and Michael. And so don't think of this as something you need to believe. Think of this as something you're capable to perceive. That's really a major takeaway that I want to impart. Now, the other thing that I'm going to weave into this, which is a bit daunting to do all this, but I'm going to try because it all comes together, is that I also want us to begin to imagine that these main preparations that go into this compost pile, and as I was saying, this for me is sacred ground. The compost pile is really like a microcosm of the cosmos that we can build as practitioners here on Earth. So there are also qualities of the planets that emanate from these. And so I'm going to weave a bit of that in. That's a longer study that I've done for years. The study started with Bernard Liebehood some years after the biodynamic work. And it really hasn't, to my knowledge, unless it's in another language, hasn't been that developed. But it's been, for me, a form of perception. I have a great love for plants, and I see these plants as emanating these planetary qualities. So I'm also going to be weaving that in. And then also, let's see here. Where's that? When I look, and I don't know that anybody else sees it this way, but I do. I haven't, again, this is my original research. It might be out there somewhere. I've just not encountered it. But as I live into these preparations, of course, they're used all together in the compost pile. But for me, their qualities have a seasonal flavor. And so for me, the oak bark really belongs to the winter. Then the dandelion, the ascending spring. The higher aspect, or the more mature aspect of spring, is the chamomile. Yarrow takes us to the summer heights. Nettle takes us into the terrain of Michael and his iron force. And then Valerian, this wonderful Saturn gift, takes us into the warmth sheath and the decaying matter as the cycle of Earth finishes before she goes to the winter depths again. So this is kind of just the template that I wanted to kind of give you an overview on. And let's see here. Why is this slide? Oh, okay. So, and just to quickly remind everybody, if you're a BD practitioner, you will see that these seasonal rhythms are also not, they're in the plant qualities, but there are also seasonal rhythms in how these are prepared. The oak bark is primarily late autumn through winter. The dandelion prep is buried in the winter and excavated in the spring. The chamomile is buried again late autumn, winter. It's particularly under the snow for a good reason, and it's dug up in the spring. The yarrow is in as summer mood. It's first hung in the air and the light, then it's buried in the autumn. The nettle prep is buried for the whole cycle of the year, but with no sheath. And so then also the Valerian doesn't have a sheath. It itself is a sheath. So there's a beautiful kind of living poetry, to my mind, in just seeing the kind of way that these remedies are made in the seasons, and how their qualities really embellish the seasons. And then just to remind us too, that we can use the two main ones, the BD called 500, but the cow horn manure or the horn silica are also, they really belong to the archetype of the polarities of winter and summer. Now we can use them throughout the year, but what I'm saying is that they bring this quality, this descending depth and life force. That's the cow horn. And the summer forces of the quartz crystal really take us into something of the light element. And so again, these have opposite complementary rhythms. So we're talking about late autumn, that the one is prepared and retrieved in spring. The other one is, the quartz is buried in late spring and retrieved in late autumn. So we see this beautiful yin yang, to say it in one way, this beautiful symmetry. And so again, these are archetypal qualities. We can, of course, use, and I do, either one, but we need to know that we're carrying these seasonal qualities forward into the soil for whatever reason as practitioners that we do that. So that being an overview, let's get started with the seasons. And this wonderful season of the winter that we're in right now is where I'll start. And this whole feeling of the earth condensing into her crystal mineral depths. The earth element, the earth as a being, is most clearly in her primal element of the earth in winter. And so even if we don't have the snow crystals that were crunching under feet. We can still feel this contraction. In winter, the earth becomes an enclosed sphere. We really have to imagine that she's breathed into herself. That's really what's going on. And so if, as Steiner says in the Four Seasons lecture, he said, if we were to look at the earth from some other planet, she would appear to us as a great water drop in the cosmos. Oh, love that. So beautiful. And it's in winter that she most clearly is that water drop. During the summer, for instance, she's a little more, we wouldn't see it as humans, but she's a little more out there and a little more plainer. But it's really in the winter that she draws in. And so these crystal salt forces withdraw inward to the earth. And this hydrosphere, this beautiful blue mantle, assumes a spherical shape. And the sun is held within. And when we really work with that, and this was, I want to say, so powerful for me, because I reached the point where I really couldn't take in this mystery, for instance, of the Madonna and Child, unless I included it with something happening with the earth. And this is for me to go to a church, it became schizophrenic. I couldn't do it that way. Maybe I'm an old pagan, even though I consider myself also a Christian, but I couldn't just hang up a picture without feeling, where's that at in the actual earth? And when I first read this lecture by Steiner, where he builds up the Christmas imagination by first doing just what I did for you, and then coming to this imagination of the mother and the child, that this blue mantle of Mary, this sort of deeply inward gesture of holding the child, arises out of the earth herself. That's an imagination that lives in the earth. And that's, for me, so stunning. I don't think there's no other way to begin to experience this that I know of, besides what Steiner brought. And I actually feel in all this that I'm going to present, if we could begin to build up these pictures, not as exterior dogma, here's what you need to believe, but as interior perception, a lot of religious wars might not be fought. A lot of dogma that politicizes, as it is in this country right now, might not. There's another way to reach the spirit, and that's through the living being of nature. And so this beautiful picture of Mary and the child is ruled by the Archangel Gabriel. And one thing, Gabriel rules the moon, and in winter, the earth becomes moon. But also, the whole process of conception and fertility is ruled by the moon. And what Steiner tells us in this winter imagination is that when a woman becomes pregnant, it's because she's able to become moon in a very real way. And then by becoming that chalice of the moon, the mother receives the sun. So it's a very sacred and deep alchemy. And I want you to take note of this, because when we come to the summer mystery, we're going to have another picture of this in another completely other way. But right now, it's the woman, the mother who holds the sun and provides the matrix for the child. It is so deeply sacred. And Archangel Gabriel, we see that in the art, and the art is, the real art is there as imaginations that lived in artists, but the whole being of Gabriel, Steiner describes as a mild and a loving being who imparts this gesture of benediction, ruling over all of these sacred life forces. And then also each one of these archangels, if we can imagine that the earth, because the earth has summer when we have winter, that's one reality. So when Gabriel is in the summer mood, he's also then working from below on the earth. So each one of these angels has a manifest aspect where we say they're ruling the season, but they're also dynamically there from the opposite way. And so in the summer, Steiner describes that Gabriel is the wonderful being who is ruling the nurturing formative forces of nutrition, which we could say would be the Demeter aspect. And I love that biodynamics is named after the goddess of the earth, but really Gabriel is so involved in all these nurturing forces. So just as the woman, this imagination of the mother and child, we also have this nurturing imagination of Demeter, who is feeding all of us. So that's just so beautiful to take in as a picture. And also then this other picture that the fructifying seed enters the ovum at only one spot. That is true biologically, but also it is true spiritually, that all the heavenly seeds of human souls enter the earth under the rulership of Gabriel. And that happens from the end of December, about 3 months, to spring, that all the souls who are embodied for the coming year, they're held there. And until they have an opportunity to incarnate, but they really live in this sphere of Gabriel and the moon, and then how the earth is receiving the moon. So that's another thing that we could say, that Gabriel rules what Steiner calls unbornness, which is such a sacred concept of how do we come to the earth and this whole sphere that we're held in lovingly by this mild being who gives benediction, and how, if one is a prospective parent, becoming sensitive to that is really so important, I think. Such a different imagination than what is given in our time. But I also want to say that Steiner says that in this winter time, this combustion process of plants and dispersing their seeds is also happening. And that in fact, that is one of the things that keeps the earth as earth. Otherwise, she would become entirely moon in the winter. But there's a certain warmth process, combustion process from the seeds that are being cast. So that's another imagination we can have, that the earth herself is a matrix for another kind of seeding, which is the seeds of the plants. And so one question that I'd like to ask, just to hold that picture of winter, is that as farmers and gardens, we participate in this matrix when we collect our own seed and store it. And my question is, how do we act on behalf of this matrix, moon mother, in the winter with seed? One of the things I do, corn is what I call my plant ally. ever since I was a child, corn is so alive for me. And I actually have the first clairvoyant experiences I ever had in a garden were through the corn. And so one thing I do many things with seeds, but one of the things I do in the winter, this is my little corn altar. This was a beautiful little piece. This woman that is working with the corn was given to me by an indigenous person in our work many, many decades ago. And I just have this little altar, and I grow Hopi blue corn. And in the winter, I have some prayers I do to just ask that the seeds that are going to come in be vibrant. And I just use the Hopi corn. I can't take all my seeds, but I use the Hopi corn as a kind of connection, or what is called a plant ally, to be with those other beautiful seeds, and to keep this imagination that seed is sacred and that seed is part of this matrix, and I'm participating in it. So I just want to put that out there. I think everybody finds their own way to these mysteries, but during the winter in particular, and of course, Steiner actually gives meditations on how to hold the seed and to develop clairvoyance through the seed. It is such we think of the seed as only material, but actually when we meditate on seeds, we can come very quickly to seeing the etheric light that is held inside, that what we're seeing is the hard kernel, but actually when we begin to meditate, we can see what envelops the seed that then comes into manifestation. So there's so much in the winter when we're not out in our gardens and doing our farming that we can do with seeds as a bridge to this beautiful world of the mother, what I call the mother matrix. And I also want to just remind us that these mysteries of the mother and child have many other places in human culture, but one of the most potent is in the ancient Egyptian mysteries. That was really where a lot of what we're doing now with agriculture, the development of the Nile, for example. But the Isis Osiris mysteries were the recognition that the old sun god could not incarnate anymore. He was torn to pieces by Typhon, and there had to be a new way for the sun to come into the earth. So I'm just going to leave that as a picture. That could be a whole talk. So I'm just going to, there's too much to say, except I want to give you just one picture of that. All of our main ages in humanity are ruled by a sign, and the bull is this glyph of the circle and the cow horns, the bull, right? So this beautiful picture of the cow comes in, and we even have this wonderful, let me see if I can get this here. When we look at these pictures of Isis, she's wearing the symbol of Taurus, you could say, but she's also wearing the bull horns, and the sun is enclosed. Again, the picture of the Madonna holding the sun from within. But now we see even this, we could also say it's the chalice of the moon. It's all of those things. And what I want to get to is that one of the things Biodynamic references, and that is part of, I would say, the winter archetype. Again, the cow belongs everywhere, but the winter archetype, the cow is the animal that is ruling this. And what I want to get to is that this old moon, which is what I'm talking about, the winter mystery, also represents a time of development of the human being. You see, the earth has had 3 other incarnations. This is her 4th big incarnation. We need to know this as citizens of the earth. While the earth was incarnating, we as human beings were also incarnating. We first had a head, then a heart and a lung in the old, what is called the old sun, and the old moon, the metabolic will limb forces. And calcium at that time was a living fluid. It wasn't the bone, it wasn't the stone, it was a living fluid. And what I want to get to is that this is going back to a teaching that was in the nursery rhymes. We knew this as a child. We don't know this with our intellect, but I love this nursery rhyme. I always loved it as a kid. The cow jumps over the moon. The dish runs away with the spoon. It's really a teaching about what I was just talking about. Because when we came into this, when the earth came into who she is now as earth, she recapitulated. She was first united with the sun and the moon. Then both the dish and the spoon, the sun is the dish, the spoon is the moon, the curving moon, ran away. The earth cast off the dish and the spoon. But there was one wonderful thing, and this is what we were being told subconsciously as children so we would feel at home, even though the earth lost the sun and the moon as part of her body. The cow jumped over the moon. In other words, these wonderful metabolic forces and this living calcium, that was part of the old moon, the cow is bringing to us. The cow jumped over the moon. So, such a beautiful teaching. So I'm also then including this as we, again, the cow, of course, live. What I'm saying is, she is the animal archetype of the nurturing moon mother. Now, I can say this really out of every fiber of my being. The cow is such a selfless, nurturing being. But also we need to remember that why she was reverenced in India. They still had clairvoyance. They could see that she mirrored, because remember, the moon is a reflective being. The moon mirrored the whole cosmos. And so when we see a cow, if we could see the cow clairvoyantly, and if it's a healthy, happy cow, the cow's metabolic life substance would raise out what it has in her digestive system. And I just want us to come to that moral appreciation of the cow, because it's such a big part of biodynamics, and it's such a powerful part of what I call the winter moon archetype. And I'm so glad that Alex brought us a reminder about another cycle of Steiner's. I'm mainly emphasizing the 4 seasons, but there's another cycle from Steiner that is the symphony of the creative word. And in this, and Alex was mentioning in particular the bee that has been brought into moral recognition by Steiner. See, Steiner isn't just saying, okay, here's how you make honey and here's how you make a lot of money. He's saying, look at who the bee is. And thank you, Alex, for the way that you build up your talk, because you did just what Steiner would want us to do, is to move into the moral appreciation. And so what I want to say is, if you want to learn more about the cow, please read the the sections on the cow in there, but the big thing is that Steiner says that by now the earth would be hardened, except that the cow is always giving us her metabolic life substance. And so we have no appreciation, really, when we just look at a cow as a unit, an economic unit. Here's how much this cow costs. Here's how much milk it's one of the things that biodynamics is doing is hopefully is bringing us into a moral appreciation of the cow. And thank you, Matthias, for what you brought. Also, this is so important that we understand that these substances and organs that we use are done with love and deep homage to these beings that are giving us their life. And so I just want to, again, bring us to that picture that the cow, with her rounded belly, her perfect metabolism, is a picture of matter becoming spirit. And that, and in particular, then, if we can think of her as part of these moon mother mysteries, that's what I want to bring. Now, I'd like to go into another part of this by talking about the substance of living calcium that is also in the oak bark. And so, and again, this particular substance is made during this season. Now, when I first was trying to get the planetary associations with these, I said, no way that the oak, because it's as a whole, that tree is ruled by Mars. So how are we saying that it has a moon aspect? And that took me a while to really work with that. But what Steiner is talking about is this living calcium that the oak has in its bark, unlike probably any other plant or tree. There's an amazing amount of calcium, but we're not just taking some dead calcium. This is one of the things in all of biodynamics, we are staying in the realm of the living. So we need to find the calcium from a plant that is in the realm of the living. And the oak bark is just that plant. And you can see it. Oh, I love the oak tree so much. They're so much a part of the Northern California landscape. And what you can see is that the oak has mastered the sculptural forces of calcium. That's a Mars virtue, to take the calcium and shape it. But this is what the oak does. Oh, look at this picture of the valley oak. I just love this plant. It's just so mastering that. By the way, the second Goethe Annum is a mastery, because the second Goethe Annum is built out of reinforced limestone, which is calcium base. And if you look at the second Goethe Annum, you see the incredible artistic mastery on a whole other level. But certainly within the realm of nature, no plant comes close, I don't think. A little bit maybe the olive tree, but the oak and what it does, this musculature. But here's something that we can really contemplate, that the mistletoe grows. You can graft it onto other things, and the philosophical medical community, for instance, has grafted it onto the apple tree. But where you will find mistletoe growing naturally is on the oak. Why? Because the mistletoe is not a plant that can live on Earth. It's actually a plant that is a remnant of the old moon, what I'm calling the old moon, the prior incarnation of Earth. And so, of course, it can live on this incredible calcium, living calcium of the oak tree. So that's another way that we can understand this moon bark that is made from this plant. And now let me just go on because I get so excited about all this. There's so much. But anyway, what we do is, this is where the poetry of Steiner comes in. I call it poetry. All of these preps, if you meditate on them long enough, they fill you with awe. But he is saying, take the dead skull and put the living calcium of the oak bark in it, and then let it flow. And I did this, we had it, I belonged to a prep group that was making the preps here, and one year we put this in a stream outside my property, and I would go there, especially at night in the full moon, but other times too, and just be blown away by what you could feel as the elemental activity around this living calcium in this sheath of the dead mineralized calcium with the water, which is a lunar element, running through it. The old moon developed this fluid element. And I just even can't, you can, if you ever do that and you just live with these preps where they're buried or where they're sort of stewing and brewing, I would say, it's so amazing. It's as amazing as it was for me when I first encountered the compost. But anyway, so oak bark prep has all these incredible vital forces and that help. See, because we can say, well, the oak bark is used when there's too much life force. And we can say, well, isn't that a good thing? No, it's not. Not if you're overrun by bacteria and fungi. So the oak, even as a known herb in herbal medicine, works. New studies have found it helpful for Staphylococcus bacterias and many of these drug-resistant bacterias. So I think we don't even know the full healing ability of oak bark, but what Steiner saw was the incredible role it can play in the compost pile by creating this living calcium force, which keeps the over-proliferation of certain life forces in balance. Now I want to jump to the season of spring and the rulership of Raphael, who was also known as Mercury, and this breathing and this weaving of substance from matter to spirit that happens in these liminal spaces between the heights and depths. And so that's Raphael. The classic picture is, this is Tobias, the young boy, and his father is blind, and Raphael has the healing substance that will help his father. Whoops, went too fast. Raphael was also known as Mercury or Hermes. Hermes was the Egyptian name. Mercury was the Roman name. He's the alchemical maestro who holds the caduceus, which is this wonderful weaving of in and out. It's still our medical symbol, but I don't think we understand it anymore. But the caduceus is showing that all healing is dynamic has to move from one polarity to another. It has to go in and out. Of course, that's something that we also know in biodynamics. Anyway, what Raphael reveals as the imagination is this stunning picture of the Christ being who is able to hold these two intense polarities of what are also living beings called Lucifer and Ahriman. And this is so stupendous that we really don't even have it. We can't even hardly imagine who the being of Christ is. But when we start to live into spring, we will see that there is a way into this mystery by understanding what is happening with nature. So I'll get to that in a moment, but let me just talk. The Lucifer and Ahriman would be another way of understanding a certain polarity that's at work in our current earth. The being of Ahriman is overly hardened. You can see that in the picture. And the being of Lucifer is overly excarnated. And both of them would rob us of our true humanity and our true ability to live here on earth. And that is the deed of the Christ being. So to bring this understanding of Ahriman into a biodynamic context, Ahriman would like to astralize the limestone or the calcium realm of earth. And it can't and it shouldn't be made that alive. It has to be brought into a certain way of working with it, because otherwise what will happen is a premature hardening. The earth herself would actually, and the human being would become also ever more calcified and hardened. So just hold that picture. It's a big picture, but it's an important one, because the other realm, the Luciferic, strives to densify the etheric realm of the earth. And this is actually happening. What the carbon dioxide that the earth needs for the carbon exchange, oxygen, we're breathing out carbon, the plants are giving us oxygen. The Luciferic beings would like to create a vaporous cloud mass above the earth that would cut off our breathing. That would be the end result. And so if we think of what is happening, Steiner said this in 1924, but that's actually what is happening. We have a mass of carbon dioxide over our planet Earth that is causing all kinds of health problems for the Earth and for human beings. But this is the other pole. On the one hand, the Earth is becoming more hardened. And on the other hand, the Earth is certain forces and substances of the Earth are being taken, they're in the wrong place. They're above the Earth rather than what we call in biodynamics carbon sequestering, which is that the carbon needs to be in the soil and needs to be in the plants. And so we need to understand that these are actual beings that are affecting these aspects of the earth. These aren't abstractions, they're beings that have to be brought into dynamic harmony. And that is really who this being called the Christ is. This wonderful gesture of the Christ is actually the symbol of Mercury, this if you ever do this and you with me, but I can't do it for you now, you'll feel that your heart is the fulcrum, that this gesture of putting the upper and the lower in their dynamic place is really then that this middle sphere has to be really present. And this is what the Christ gives us, this self, not I, but Christ working in me, that balances these two polarities, and that we can see we don't need to call it a religion or any kind of dogma, but biodynamic medicines have as their gift to balance these two realms, to make the earth habitable and part of the living creation. And so I want to say then that carbon, we need to understand carbon is also the philosopher's zone. Carbon becomes the way that we build a certain diamond body of light in ourselves. And so we also, Steiner says, and he says that in the agriculture course of all places, he gives one of the best clues. This idea of the philosopher's stone is all over alchemy, and it's mentioned in other places. He says it's carbon. Carbon is the philosopher's stone. And what we're doing in meditation is we're building some residue of carbon in us, but consciously. And by doing that, we can become more aware of nitrogen. So now let me just talk about nitrogen for a moment, because that's at the heart of all agriculture. That's what's driving agriculture. How do we fertilize plants? It's with nitrogen. But what is nitrogen? Nitrogen is the soul of the earth, and the soul of our own being. If we were to trace the path of nitrogen in ourselves, we would see that we have almost like another being that is an image of us, but it's nitrogen. It's like Steiner calls it the most beautiful ghost imaginable. And so it's the nitrogen that can then live with the philosopher's stone of the carbon, creating the light body in us. But that's also so necessary for living on earth in the right way. And so, as Steiner says, in agriculture, we need to learn to meditate, to learn to practice carbon sequestering in ourselves. We're doing it for the earth, but we also need to do it for ourselves, because we won't be able to feel nitrogen as a being. And that is also one of the ways to understand Raphael. Raphael is trying to bring us this mystery of nitrogen. And so let me just go on here. I want to just state what has happened, the evil side of nitrogen in our time. Nitrogen naturally occurs as a gas. And so it's taken in by our breathing and by this carbon dioxide oxygen exchange that then allows the nitrogen to come to us. It's also in our nitrogen bearing plants, especially the legumes. And that's why it's so important to have those as cover crops. What happened, the diabolical thing that happened in 1910 was that the process of converting nitrogen into a mineral crystal state when it should be. So then this became the source of ammunition of wars, because we can build all kinds of explosive devices. All of our guns, everything is built on this chemistry. There's more to it, of course, as it's become more complex, but it began with the chemistry of being able to make explosives. which is an improper use of the air element. And then also this became a big multi-billion-dollar industry, as it is now, of creating nitrogen as a mineral to sell. When what biodynamics is that we want to create the living nitrogen, because the living nitrogen will put the other pole, the aromatic pole, the overly calcified pole, in its place as well. We will gradually be able to create an earth that takes up the calcium in the mineral in the right way. And that's what was meant when we had this wonderful, it's actually very deep and mysterious, when Satan, who is Ahriman, says, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. But the Christ didn't do that, because that would be robbing the earth and humanity of what they need for their evolution. What we have to learn to do, which is what biodynamic agriculture is doing, is learning how to bring the calcium into the right relationship to nitrogen and carbon and various other elements. That's what biodynamics is. It's gradually turning stones into bread. It's allowing the hardened earth that we need, that the mineral in the soil is then becoming a source of fertility, a source of food. But Steiner warns us, don't assume that the bread you eat doesn't have these other forces in it. If you don't put those forces in it, you become more and more, should we say, hardened. That's the point. The real point of biodynamic agriculture is that food is alive and that our souls can be nourished by it, and that this nitrogen element that is living, not hardened and crystallized, is what is nourishing the plants. And I'm going to have to, because of time, but if we become aware, what I want to say is that if we become more and more aware of who plants are, we will also become more and more aware of who Christ is. Again, it is not thumping a Bible over somebody's head. It is being able to see this living being who will become more and more available to people. Our young people will be more and more being able to see this being, not in an artificial way with drugs, but through, if we can build enough of this living etheric earth, and even there will be new elemental beings. But let me go into the two plants that particularly belong to this spring mystery. The first is dandelion, because dandelion has these strong earth forces. That's why Monsanto has made its other billions trying to kill the dandelion. It's really a form of evil, because the dandelion is so important for the earth. The dandelion, when this winter, this vernal light of spring is coming, the dandelion is right there. Because Steiner says that what happens with calcium, that is when it can be taken over by these more hardening aromatic forces. And I know this because I grew up near chalk fields. You can really feel the intensity of calcium in the early spring. It's like Steiner says it's greedy. It wants something. It'll take anything it can get. And what dandelion is doing is bringing in the counterpole of silica to shape the calcium. And so if we can just get that feeling with the dandelion, that's why in the agriculture course, it is distributing this silica. And the silica then can help the calcium come into the plants in the right way, rather than being taken over by these other forces. And you see in dandelion then that it has the strong potassium signature, which belongs to the earth. It has all these intense roots. The roots actually live in the earth and then emerge. But if I don't understand how we ever got to killing the dandelion, because my dandelion never takes over my property. It's in complete balance. It's there for us, and then it flies away. It's such a beautiful springtime gift. And we see this force in it, like it can push up through the hardened pavement. And it's called the teeth of the lion, the dent de lion, because look at these strong indentations. It has these fierce aspects and this light force of the silica. And then what we want to see too, even the whole flower is raying out. It doesn't have central discs. If you study the composite family, this one has none of it's in the composite family, but it has none of the central disc flowers. It has just the raying out ones. It's so vigorous and exuberant with its spring energy to break through the earth and to bring this silica. And here's some of it growing on our property. We have to just be right on our toes to pick it, because if one day it's a flower, the next it's a crystal. It is so distinct and intense with every stage. Also, it carries this latex sap, which is another picture of the living silica. These plants, I mentioned calcium was at first a fluid substance. So was silica. It belongs more to the mysteries of the sun than the moon, which is calcium. But dandelion is one of these plants that carries the ancient archetype of the milk secretions and has then this ancient connection to the sun and to the distant planets. I would say it's ruled by Jupiter, which is very close to when Jupiter was originally formed, not the planet we know now, but the being of Jupiter. It came out of the sun incarnation of the earth. And so we see this wonderful picture of silica flying away. And of course, I always say that the dandelion likes to get a little help from its friends. And so we all enjoy helping dandelions sail back to its silica home. But I just love dandelion every year. I just can't understand why we on Earth are killing this plant. But I do want to say again that silica, one of the big uses of dandelion is for the liver, because the liver needs to have this aliveness. And so when we use dandelion as a herbal remedy, we're working a lot with the liver to rejuvenate the bile, to bring the liver up when it gets too phlegmatic, which is more of a winter condition, a diuretic for the excess fluid, etc. I just wanted us to understand that this plant has so much benefit to humanity. And then also, as I know that Matthias was also talking about this mesentery, this huge life organ that from the cow that the dandelion is buried in, that it's sowed into, and then that's buried. And so again, we want to thank the cow for giving this life organ that it's really what is the mesentery is what I would say holds the inner heaven of the cow as she's transforming matter to spirit. And so if we think of how this whole messenger from heaven, that's what Steiner calls dandelion, is held in the inner heaven of the cow. Oh gosh, what just so inspiring. And so this one is buried in the through and is buried in the earth throughout the winter, and then it's unearthed in the spring. And so it's one of the first of the spring remedies, and the other spring remedy is more what I want to call the higher, a little more mature spring, going into this what the Celtic would call the Beltane time, around May 1st, and that's chamomile. And we're going to see what chamomile does to help these ascending forces that are taken over. It's working with this calcium pole, but it's also working with the nitrogen, which is the air pole, which is, I mentioned that these excarnating forces, what are called the luciferic forces, would take the nitrogen and the carbon that goes with the nitrogen and put it in the upper pole of the earth when it really belongs here. So we need to have this appreciation that chamomile is doing such a deed for us. But let's first just look at this beautiful plant. Oh, the leaves are so feathery and fine. It's really, I would say that as an archetype, it's ruled by Mercury. It has so much movement and this fine fleet-footedness that we associate with the Mercury archetype. Its root network, if you're to dig and excavate, you would see that unlike the dandelion is a taproot. No, not this one. It's a fine, just like what you see in the leaves, that's also in the roots, just fine light work in the earth herself. And chamomile grows in that sweet spot between spring and summer, when it's not too warm, the nights are mild, the days are sun-dappled. And believe me, I learned this. I grow all of these plants are all part of our work here at Terra Flora. I once, I needed more chamomile than we had produced. And so I sowed a second batch of it in the summer, and it grew, but not like chamomile should grow. And it didn't have the scent. It didn't have the lightness. So this is one thing we learn about the plants, is how articulate they are, how precise their identities are in terms of their communion with the seasons. So I had a batch of chamomile that I really couldn't use. I just composted it because I now understand how chamomile is in that sweet spot. And that's why I say it's around about May, end of May, possibly into June. But that's when you can make wonderful chamomile for medicines and such. And that's when you smell the sweetness of it. It's, like I said, the flower, all of it is so light-filled, so diaphanous, wafting in the light, emanating this, oh, have you smelled chamomile? The scent of it is so sweet, so delicate. That's why I think in Spanish it's called apple something, because manzanilla, because it has this quality of kind of like a sweet apples. But the thing with chamomile is it always gives you the feeling that it would like to fly away into the upper air. But it shows this intriguing polarity when you look at it. There's the downward and the upward, you know? So it's like it would like to fly away, but something is containing it. And that's why Steiner says it stabilizes nitrogen, because if you do a cross section and you open up this beautiful conical center, it's all air. but the air has this structure around it. So it's really like containing the air. And so we can get, of course, when we make the biodynamic medicine, we're also combining it with the sheath of the cow, the intestine. But we can see in the chamomile itself that it has, to some degree, conquered this polarity of this earth connection and also how the air can be stabilized in it. And now if we think, for those of you who are parents, the chamomile is the go-to remedy for what? Something like colic, for example. What is colic? It's this air element that's caught, that's trapped, that's not working in the right way. Poor little baby who has all this gas buildup in their stomach. But if we think about it, it's wonderful for all kind of stomach cramps, irritable bowel syndrome. Digestion happens properly when the air element is working into the food. That's why if we can think of the cow's intestine, she has the perfect digestion. She's got digestion down in spades. She's the queen of digestion. So just think of how the chamomile flowers are going to be united with the cow's intestine. And the other thing about the chamomile, that we can also use it for all these kind of hyperactivity, it's a classic remedy for children for that reason, because they're trying to master their little air bodies. And so, but there's a child in all of us too. The hypermobility, the life didn't go well, this emotional kind of volatility, all of that, this calming that comes from chamomiles, because it's learned how to take this air element and build this structure over it. And so it also is this hypermobility of Mercury itself, that archetype that it wants to be mobile, but it also has to learn how to be productive and centered and happy, I would say, in its life. So anyway, as I was saying, we pick these beautiful yellow flowers and just to remind us that the cow has already worked the matter through these 4 stomachs, and then the intestine. This is the sheath that we use for the chamomile, where this beautiful sacred transformation is finally is given its final working. And that's, so again, the sacred cow, the holy cow, who can unite this organ of the intestine to become the sheath. And then interesting, it's only for the chamomile that Steiner gives this indication: bury it under snow. And here in Northern California, Harold Hoban will always faithfully take the chamomile and put it up in a spot that he's found, but so that it will this beautiful snow, because these crystal light forces really also are working to contain this air element and to make it really, that's why Steiner says the chamomile has this nitrogen fixing quality. It's helping this air element that I've already mentioned, how important it is in this whole balancing of the Christ being between Lucifer and Ahriman. Here is the chamomile working to channel this air, to direct this air element, this nitrogen fixing element, so that it can be in the soil, and so that it can also heal us too. And so that is my little spiel on chamomile. When we return from the break, we're going to go into the golden glory of summer, which is a whole other mood.
Hey, welcome back, Patricia. I think we were just diving into the brightness of summer.
Yes. So Uriel is probably of these 4 archangels, the other 3 are a little bit more familiar in art or legends or stories. But Uriel is so amazing. And so Uriel lives in these mysteries of sulfur, of the high summer sun. And one of the things that we will see is that each of these archangels works in a way that wouldn't work at another season. So for example, calcium is at rest in the mother in winter. But then calcium becomes a problem in spring that has to be handled by Raphael and by the Christ being, helping the calcium and the other pole, the nitrogen, and the carbon with the nitrogen, find their right place. And the same is going to be true of the sulfur. The sulfur is the splendid home of Uriel, but it will become problematic at another time. So we have to have a certain dynamism in understanding this. But in summer, all the sulfur element is exalted everywhere. This is one of the paintings by Vincent van Gogh. I think his secret desire was to sulfurize the whole universe if he could. I love his paintings, all of his sunflowers. But every flower really is this bright sulfur flame going out into the universe. Such beauty in the light of summer. And Steiner describes that we ourselves, if we could be seen from another, and we are seen from other planetary beings, we're like fireflies. We're suffused also. We don't see it because we're not clairvoyant, but we're also suffused, and we become a kind of way of being seen, just like we see fireflies in the meadow. We are also glowed through with all of this wonderful sulfur firelight, just like the fireflies. And Uriel shines in this summer radiant height. He is the essence of cosmic intelligence, who is taking this fire and, in a sense, weaving for the whole cosmos what the earth can give, not only for itself, but the earth lives in communion with the whole vast cosmos. And what she gives out of herself can become mana for other aspects of the cosmos. So Steiner describes that this cosmic intelligence is being woven out of the sun gold. And Uriel gazes down into the crystal depths of the earth, down into the Mother Earth. And so remember when we painted this picture of the Madonna and the child, she's resting there in the crystal in another way. But now, in the summer, Uriel is gazing down into her reality. And I love this picture I'm going to show you from Nicholas Roerich, where he really envisions this being, this mysterious being who's so full of wisdom. And so this silver sparkling blue of the earth's depths, Steiner says this isn't just an abstraction, just a stuff. It's a being. It's the Earth Mother, whether she's called Demeter or Mary. And all of these secrets of the depth, the secrets of the earth herself are kind of held in this being. And I want to thank my good friend Dennis, because I've had this painting of his gracing my home now for probably 40 years. But Dennis created this wonderful painting. I think he's done it, a few versions of it, but I have one of the originals of the silver, we could just say of the ascended Sophia, because what's happening is Uriel is taking this earth substance, the silver, and weaving it into his gold. And so I just love this picture. Here's a little closer up of it, because then we get this idea of Sophia ascending, which is all, we would say, all the wisdom of earth is being married to the cosmic sun intelligence of Uriel. That's what it means that the silver and the gold are alchemically coming together. And so I just love this picture. We could also say this is a Whitsun. Whitsun comes just at the very beginning of summer. And then we have also the high summer, what is called St. John's Tide. But such a beautiful, and I love that what Dennis did in this beautiful cosmic imagination of the Earth Mother is, I'm going to give you a close up here so you can see it. She's got the horns of Isis on her. So I love that she's wearing the cow horns. But I hope you can also see how beautifully Dennis imagined this. He's got all of these various plants and animals in her garment. All of these ascending forces of the dove, which Steiner says that Uriel is ultimately kind of a picture of this winged dove being who's breathing over the earth. The colors in here, the rainbow colors, I could go on, but I just wanted to thank Dennis for this further imagination of Sophia ascending from her realm of in the earth as the Earth Mother, lifted up by the forces of the Whitsun summer mood. But there's a little drama going on here too, because when Uriel gazes down into the blue depths of the earth, and remember, Steiner says, Uriel is sifting. He can only take the best of the alchemical process of the earth. The best meaning that he can't use a substance in the gold glory of what he is doing for the cosmos that doesn't make it, doesn't qualify. And that's why Steiner says clairvoyantly, when you find Uriel as an initiate, you see that he has a stern look. Steiner also calls it a judicial look. He has to decide what can be used and what, and Steiner says one of the tragedies is that we as human beings are putting substance in the earth. But that I mean also our thoughts, our moral conceptions. And in those moral conceptions, we're not recognizing how many errors we have. And let me just give an exact, I want to bring that when we do this horn silica, knowing that Uriel is working in the crystal depths, I really feel it's a time that we need to also work inwardly and ask ourselves, what are we? What is in our soul we're putting out? Or what is it in the world soul that we need to rethink or reimagine? So let me just give you an example, because there's so many. But I read recently that University of Davis, UC Davis, a huge, huge research institute that affects the world, and especially agriculture it affects, because California has such a big part of its economy based on agriculture. So a gazillion dollars, I can't remember the exact number, has been given for research to create a genome that would not have the cow make methane. Now, the cow is making methane because we are confining the cow, which is a horrible sin. But now, because of a misguided idea of what will help the earth, we're going to try and change the cow by creating a false genome. The cow herself is perfect, but we don't have this. We have a whole world being in academia and so-called, I mean, this is like, they think they're solving the world problem by fixing the cow. But what really needs to change is our understanding, as Alex was saying, and as I was already saying earlier about the cow, that we don't see who the cow is, how sacred she is. And so who needs to change their thought form is not the cow, but the person. We need, and how do we do that? You can't just go, I can't, when I read this, I wanted to call somebody and say, wake up. But it's a moral reckoning that the people who are trying to change the cow have probably never even lived with a cow. They might just smell some smelly feedlot and think, oh, the problem is all this methane gas is going into the air. But the problem is the cow isn't grazing on green grass. She's not eating as she should. She's being fed grains when she should be fed. So she's making methane. Now, that's just one tiny example, but, and you see that in the thought substance of the earth, we haven't reckoned morally what we're doing because we don't see, or we're greedy, etc. I mean, all of the thought forms that human beings are glorified apes. That can't be taken up by Uriel. So we have a lot of work. If we understand that Uriel can only offer to the cosmos the substance that is morally right and integrate and virtuous, I think there's a real opportunity when we work with the horn silica, especially in the summer, that we try to do some inner work around it and our own self, examine where are our thoughts. I know a lot of times as gardeners and farmers, we're just seeing, okay, I have to produce these plants because this is the money I get. That's not a thought Uriel can use. So we have a lot of work to do. And I just want to put it out there that in the summer, when knowing that Uriel is lifting from the earthly depths these crystal worlds of thought, and the Sophia, who is taking the best of the wisdom of earth, can we, when we offer the silica, try to offer it in a mood of prayer, of awakening for who we are on the earth, and even perhaps making amends. So can we sift our own hearts? That's what Uriel is doing. Can we sift our own hearts and be a part of the real wisdom of Sophia being lifted up by Uriel. That would be my question that we, as a practice. And now I want to move into the flower that is so evocative of summer. Sulfur. Steiner says that this plant, like no other, has perfected sulfur. And it does that, it literally is spirit into matter, because what the Yarrow has built is this template using potassium. And potassium is that part of the more earthly elements that builds all the structure. And so you see in Yarrow this incredibly powerful and intricate and elegant and precise structure, and yet it's all breathed through. So it's not like a thick, dense, it's all breathed through. And so Steiner says how Yarrow has this influence. He said we need to keep it, we need to grow it. We ourselves, it's one of our flagship medicines, and we had already independently discovered this quality of Yarrow before we actually found Biodynamics that it was used, that Yarrow has such a healing effect on the environment and also on purifying and strengthening our own personal environment around us because of its ability to bring light into matter in such an extraordinary and exquisite way. It really is. Steiner says the elemental beings have reached the peak of perfection in this plant. And I can tell you, because we have probably hundreds of thousands of people who have used some of the Yarrow products that we have made, just unsolicited testimonials. Ben is raising his hand from people who they don't believe in this stuff. You know, they say, well, my dad didn't believe in this, but I gave him this. And, you know, so the Yarrow is so important. And I could be here all day, but I just want you to appreciate, it's called millefolium, 1,000 leaves, because the thing is, every tiny detail of this is perfect. It's so intricate. And so it's matter, but matter that is breathed through, so the sulfur can get in it. And that's what it does in our auras when we take it as a medicine. It's helping us not to lose our sensitivity, but to have our sensitivity be grounded and integrate. And the flower also is got this same amazing intricacy. This is one where if you take a botanical lens and look at it, you'll just be endlessly fascinated, because what we can see with the naked eye doesn't even begin. Here's a blow up of just one of those flowers I showed you. It is still creating detail there. So you really see the mastery. And there's also, personally, we work with some other colors and slightly other forms of Yarrow, but it's the white one, I believe, that is always used in biodynamics. And it also gives us an insight. This was the big I Ching from the Oriental practitioners. Why? Because even in autumn, when plants are dying, this plant has so much sensitivity, so much sulfur, that they would pick the dried Yarrow stalks, and they knew that this plant could still, even dried, because you got to have it dried to make it, to use it as a divination tool. But even then, the Yarrow was picking up all these sensitive aspects of earth changes, which is what the I Ching is built on, is really observing nature. That was the real original I Ching. And so just to say, you know, that the Yarrow has an illustrious use and throughout history, and in the Greek warriors, Achilles, that is the other name, was for the Greek warrior who was mortally wounded because he had the vulnerability in his heel. So, but anyway, what Yarrow does is it's called the warrior's remedy because it will staunch wounds. It literally has this ability to close wounds. And so this is also one of the things why we use it as such a powerful auric stabilizer, is that a lot of times, because we don't have that integrity in our aura, there are parts of us that aren't well or are overly sensitive or are bleeding, as it were, psychically. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a feeling of why the Yarrow is so important. And now the interesting thing is that Yarrow is picked as the fresh flowers are put in the stag of a bladder. In the, sorry, in the bladder of a stag. And so let's move into that imagination and appreciate again what I'm calling the poetry of Steiner's earth medicines. So first of all, it's the summer. It's exposed first to the summer forces, to the air and the light. Then it's buried in the earth. But let's look at the stag. What an animal. So glorious, so sensitive. The stag lives in intimate connection with its environment. Again, we're thinking of the Yarrow does this, but so does the stag in another way as an animal. It's raying, it has antlers, as Steiner points out. It's the direct opposite of the cow. The cow, the horns are moving in to the head, down and in. The stag has these antlers that are reaching out into the cosmos to pick up every bit of sensitivity. And remember, that's what Uriel is doing too. So to weave the archangel, the archetypal animal, the archetypal flower, they're all sensitive. They're all cosmic. They're all extended out into something fine and beautiful that they're sensing. And think of the cow. When the cow is grazing, her head is down and she has more of a heaviness. Think of if you ever see a stag or a deer running, they're fleet-footed, they're almost a little bit what Steiner says is nervous in the sense of how sensitive they are, how perceptive to every little movement. But anyway, but there's one more thing to say. See, let's look at this organ of the bladder, the round spherical bladder that's, we could say it's a kind of image of the whole cosmos. And it's related to the kidney. And by the way, that is Venus, which is related to this beautiful yarrow plant, it rules the kidneys. But here's what to understand that many people do not understand about the bladder in the human being and in the animal. We think of the bladder is, oh, okay, we need to eliminate this fluid, and here's the convenient little organ that we, it's stored up in, and then we eliminate it. But actually, Carl Koenig, I want to give credit to him, gave me the understanding of the bladder because he worked therapeutically with children who had urinary incontinence at night. But he also saw that that was a soul illness. Because what the bladder really is that it should become full. If we're healthy, our bladder should be stretched out. And by the way, when you make this remedy with the yarrow flowers in the bladder, you have to keep putting more and more flowers in. And you will think, I'm done. No, the master there, be it Harald Hoven or whoever else, says, no, because this bladder wants to keep stretching and stretching, and you really need to fill the sheath completely in order to get the healing that this bladder medicine will make. But the same thing is true for the human being. We need to have our bladder be able to fill completely if we're healthy, because when the bladder fills completely, and this is what Carl Koenig gave the beautiful insight on, our soul can be that expanded. And at night, when we're sleeping, our soul wants to go way out into the universe. When we have incontinence, it's not only that we're woken up and that's inconvenient, but it's also that our soul isn't able to breathe with the whole cosmos. So a healthy bladder is also a healthy soul. And the stag, what I want to say is the stag has the superiority, just as the female cow has the superiority in another way. The male stag, with its incredibly expansive bladder, is the picture of cosmic sensitivity and expansion, especially when holding the yarrow flowers. I just hope you can get this, because I'm trying to give you the words and the images, but it's beyond that. My reverence goes to Steiner, to how he put together, he's like the master chef, the way that he brought the animal's organ or all of it is so filled with intelligence. And that's also what Uriel is bringing, is this cosmic intelligence. If we could work with nature and see nature, and hopefully when Uriel looks down, where there are biodynamic practices happening, that is substance he can take up, I hope, I think. And this is what the earth needs, so she can be a cosmic player. Now, as we move through summer, Uriel's golden sun forces unite with what I call the fire heart of the lion in August, Leo, the lion, just to bring the cat into all of this, the cat and the fiddle playing on our heart. But anyway, the Perseid meteor showers radiate cosmic iron. And that is going to become Michael's sword as we now start to prepare for autumn. So these meteor showers stream down, and Steiner says we have to understand they're also changing our blood so that we can begin to receive iron. And the processes which are going on in every blood corpuscle when iron shoots into it are the same as this macrocosmic. And that's the communion of this that Michael is able to use to create his sword, and then to also bring the iron to us. So autumn, we're moving to the final season on the round, is a whole other feeling, because as we move now, nature herself is waning. She's going to continue to wane and die, at least as manifest. And it's in autumn that we have to awaken to a kind of nature consciousness. And also the sulfur principle that had been so glorious has another little problem in it, which is that it makes us, we can't handle the fire ultimately as humans right now. We get too dreamy. We get too excarnated. And so what happens is these kind of, this is why Michael is often shown fighting the dragon, because this sulfurous element starts to take over. Our desires play into that as well, so that we're burning with desire, but what are we burning for? You know, it's often to meet lower desires. And so we're not really, the sulfur is really getting appropriated by these lower forces where other beings can kind of move in there. And now what we need is to disperse the sulfur, that is to fight the dragon and to awaken to a higher kind of self-consciousness. And that's what is this journey. And here I want to do, again, I'm bringing dear Dennis into this because this is one of his pictures of Michael. And oh, Dennis, thank you. I can't tell you how many times just to look at this picture just gives me this feeling for who Michael is, this radiant heart, this glance, this forward glance or posture, gesture. The Michael age has dawned. Hearts begin to have thoughts. Enthusiasm no longer flows from mystical obscurity, but from inner clarity that thought conveys. So it's not a matter of not having thinking. It's a matter that the thinking needs to be fused with heart fire and with a kind of grasp of the spirit. And Dennis actually addressed that on the very first day as part of the theme of this conference. I just want to say, this is what Michael especially brings us, that our thinking can go beyond this kind of anemic, and anemic is the word, because anemic means we don't have iron in the right way. Our thoughts are so anemic. They don't have this vigor. And this is what Michael is giving us. So it's a self-consciousness. We can't get it all passively just from nature herself unless we ourselves see nature in a different way. Here's something else that's interesting. As we go full circle, I started out by talking about this role of calcium in the mother's milk and the cow. But let's remember, the child, there's hardly negligible iron in milk because infants can't take that up yet. Iron is something we learn to take up as we mature. And I would say that on a collective level, we're still all babies because we still don't really, even though some of us have perhaps a better grasp of it, as a collective humanity, we're still babies. We're not handling iron. And one of the things also that Steiner says in the Michael imagination for the seasons is we're using iron materially. We built the Iron Age, the Steel Age, all of that is iron. We're using it for all of our machinery. I once watched World War II from the point of view of iron, and they would introduce a new thing for killing that had a new steel template. It's amazing how much mankind has used steel to create the material age, but not to take up inside of ourselves. Another thing that's interesting, in the medical lectures, Steiner pointed out that if your voice is hoarse a lot or weak, that is a classic sign of iron deficiency. And because he said it's these will forces need to come in the word, in the logos. And so to develop our voice is to also bring this iron quality into it. Michael must permeate us with a strong power, the need to see what is material and what is spiritual, and to see that in the material is the spiritual. That is our task, to awaken to what is around us and to begin to imbue it with a different kind of seeing. And let me see here. I just want to, so what we're doing, what Michael wants to do basically is build a stronger, more vibrant soul structure in us. That everything that we look at, every tone we hear, that we would see the spiritual source in it, that we would be vigorous enough to not just passively, oh, here's a bunch of trees, isn't that pretty? Here's a cow, here's a bird, here's a bee. But to do what Alex was modeling with the bee, one of the things you can feel is how Alex is. His sense of the bee is so deeply, deeply connected to the bee, out of reverence. He's not talking about the bee as some kind of economic unit and here's how you can get more honey. He's talking about how his soul has moved into the bee with clarity, with intelligence, and with moral passion. That is Michaelic. And this is what we need to do with the whole earth. The whole earth needs to have this kind of soul vitality that we bring to it. Right now, we see things, we manipulate them, we use them for egoic or material ends, but that's not Michaelic. And this picture that Steiner gave just after the agriculture course, a group of youth from that course gathered around them, said, what do we do? And one of the things, it's a longer course, you can read it. I have the GA number there to read the whole thing, but he says that nature power leads to an understanding that the sword of Michael needs to be forged on an altar, which is underground. And it's not enough just to forge the soul. We all each have to find it, which means that we have to feel that this iron force, this meteoric iron, is anchored in the earth, and we can find it as our anchor, as our orientation, as our strength, as our courage, because it's not an easy, the Michaelic challenge is not an easy one. We also live in a world that is so harsh and materialistic and warlike and nihilistic. It will take a lot. I love this. Oh, nature, your one of the things I wanted to say is Steiner had written the calendar of the soul about 10 years earlier, 12 perhaps, from the point of view of the soul. And it would be, I would love, I just didn't have time in this, but I want to invite everybody that all of these verses, if we then bring in what I'm saying about biodynamics, the medicines, and the archangels, we will see that all the calendar of the soul also comes even more alive, not that it isn't already. But I love this one that I'm sharing with you. And now let me go to the to the plant that is so Michaelic, and that is the stinging nettle, that is so full of these iron forces. And as Steiner said, is the greatest benefactor of plant growth in general. And how this stinging nettle, Steiner says it incorporates sulfur, the spiritual, and yet again, it's carrying the potassium, this earthly and the calcium, these earthly substances. But the particular gift that Steiner credits the nettle to is the iron radiation. And he describes the nettle as almost as beneficial. What it does is it's doing something for the earth that also is being done for our human blood. This intelligence, this strength. It also, he even gave a little hint to Count Kaiserling during the agriculture course. You could use this on your land because it's so good also. I have it growing here because it's so wonderful for balancing iron, and we have a lot of red clay, i.e. a lot of iron. So it's also going to take up iron that might be in overabundance. It's going to draw that. And by the way, nettle grows in all these waste piles, areas. I have a friend who is using it to take other heavy metals out of the soil. I think it takes iron out, but it does take others out as well. It's so cleansing. It does the same thing for the human blood, by the way. But what I want to show you is, here's the swords of Michael on a micro level. All of these, this is what creates the sting, all this formic acid in this plant and histamine. And so all these little hairs, when they break off, are that sting that we feel. But this is just a close-up so we can just appreciate the Michaelic, Mars-like forces in this plant. And one of the interesting thing, I'm a student of color in plants, and the green flowers, there's not that many green flowers. Most plants, that's the vegetative color, the green, but then the plant takes on other colors. But there are a number of green flowers. All of them I find so healing, but the nettle is one of those. It has little scent or color, and its flowers are wind pollinated. It grows in these clusters that are called racemes. And that is the part of the plant that disperses the pollen. So the green flowers, what I have found in my research of studying a number of these is that they stay close to the heart of the earth. There's a fascinating one called green rose that was actually developed alchemically for that very quality of heart connectedness. But the stinging nettle belongs to that. And if we can understand that quality in the stinging nettle, we will understand why it didn't require a sheath. Because in a way, first of all, it already has almost an animal-like quality in this stinging, but also it lives in communion with the earth. And so as green flowers do in a very special way. So it doesn't need an animal sheath. It stays with the earth. And we put it in for the whole cycle of the earth. That's interesting too. It's like it lives with the whole being of the earth for the whole cycle of the earth. Here's something I found in my research. Just want to share it. You can test it. If you stand next to a patch of nettles on an August night during the meteor showers, if you lightly touch, I don't mean getting stung by it, but just lightly touch the nettle, you will feel internally this, you will feel that I'm showing you in the picture, this sort of meteor shower within you. I also do an after image after I've touched it, and I can see the after image. It's like scintillating all through my body. It's such a resonance between microcosm and macrocosm. I just can't tell you how the nettle is, I know the nettle is in communion, even if it's bloomed earlier in the year or whatever, when the nettles, they feel this cosmic iron. And so I think they're taking that from the environment as much as they're taking iron up from the earth. That's my own personal research. Steiner speaks of how the nettle should grow around the human heart. How beautiful. And the nettle health benefits are so ubiquitous. There's so much the nettle does. We all need to be taking it. But especially for heart ailments, for circulation, blood tonic, it's so good, such a healer. And I do want to say that nettle is, I ferment it, and I have a large container, and I ferment the green leaves because it's such a boost to the whole earth. And a lot of times what I'll do when I'm then applying it, I'll take some of the biodynamic nettle as well. And by the way, I do that with the other ones. I just didn't have a chance to talk about that, but the nettle, it's in the compost pile, yes, but we can use it on the land as a green manure. I've also used it when turning over the compost pile. Is so healing for the land in so many ways, and especially in the later August, when things get a little tired. The earth has been, the soil has gotten depleted, it's tired. That's when we really can wake up the soil. And here's just, of making the nettle prep. And I do want to say too, that I will always grow some nettle around my compost pile. I don't have any scientific proof, but the nettle loves to grow. It's like a green guardian or something. It loves to grow right there. And so I need to move on to close up with the Valerian and go into the Saturn. Now the Saturn is the sickle or the cycle that comes to the end. That's why Saturn always carries the sickle. And Saturn is so important in the life of agriculture. The sickle, the cutting back, the pruning. And when we look at Valerian, and that one also grows so beautifully here, it is, of course, we're making it only from the flowers, but it's such a one. All of these, by the way, are bee food, and the Valerian, but this one likes to grow a little bit more in the shade. That's what's interesting. It's not a shade plant, but it will kind of grow in the liminal space. It doesn't want a lot of sun. It doesn't want complete darkness either. But in where I have it, it'll grow very nicely just on the liminal places of damp woods, for example, a little bit shade or a forested edge. Like here's a picture of it out in the wild. It's or more wild, a little more wild. So that liminal space between light and dark. And also a lot of times where trees are is kind of a dead zone, because as Steiner said, there's a poverty of ethericity around trees, okay? Because the tree is lifting up the earth and taking the soil with it. But my observation is that Valerian grows quite nicely there. So it likes something a bit dead. And that's another kind of Saturn gesture. These compound leaves, and they're kind of fern-like, again, giving that feeling that there's a kind of damp and a dark quality. Even though these flowers are so white and light and effervescent, there's a polarity in it of something that's very light-filled, but also really attenuated to darkness and dampness. And so they have a delicate scent, the flowers, and these extended stamens that are often a picture of reaching into the light. But then as you look down into this plant, you see more and more of this dark and this moist element. That's what I'm trying to build up for you, is a picture of this polarity of light and dark. And now when you get to the roots, oh my goodness. So those of you who have smelled valerian know It is intense. For me, it has like a rotting, the intensity is not a pleasant. It's a smell that belongs to the deep earth and to something that is wanting to rot a little bit. So I love this kind of pun because it was called PHU, but we say phew, phew, that kind of thing. It stinks because it does. It's intense. And so what I would say is the valerian flowers ascend into the light, but its pungent roots are taking that an astral force that we can, that's why it's sentient. There's an aroma there, and taking it deep into the dark earth. And here's Matthias. I don't know if you're watching, but here's a picture of you picking some of it on my land many moons ago. So you can see how beautiful and tall it grows. And then we're pressing the valerian flowers. It's pretty easy to make. And of course, this is also, so in this cycle, in this circle I'm showing you of these various sheaths, we get to the earth herself is the sheath with nettle. And now we have no sheath. The valerian becomes the sheath. We're putting it over the compost pile. We're using it as a warmth. It's used on a practical level. I know somebody who saved a crop once when we had an early frost, just putting valerian as a warmth cover. So, but the place in the compost pile is before we cover the pile with straw, we're always putting that valerian sheath of the prep over it to create that, what I want to call brooding warmth. And those of you who know anthroposophy know that Saturn, the original incarnation of Earth, was brooding warmth. So that it's darkness, but in the darkness is a light-bearing quality. That's the difference between phosphorus and sulfur. They're both light-bearing, but phosphorus is able to glow in the dark. So here's the symbol for phosphorus. It's ascending, it belongs to the light-bearing elements, but it has this powerful earth anchor, like I'm down here too. So you see that in the sign itself, in the glyph. So ascending sulfur, but these phosphorus compounds that glow in the dark, we're taking light into the earth, or we're providing the sheath by which a kind of germinal light can be in the earth. And so I do want to say that this deep rest to keep the Sabbath is part of the lesson of Valerian. And also, I think on our land, I have to say, we're talking about bees. I've used valerian, either the tincture and or the prep or together. It depends on the intuition I have at the moment. But say, for instance, here in Northern California, we have such an extended autumn, and it's becoming more so with global warming, that our bees can sometimes not want to come. They're still building brood, for example. They can be building brood, and then we'll get a cold snap really, really strongly. And it's a shock. And so one thing I do is already start to try and bring that rest state into the bees because we need actually rest to keep the Sabbath, that. And also, I think that when the land needs to come to the rest, or when we as farmers and gardeners need to come into rest, like, why are we trying to milk cows 24/7 all year long? The old wisdom was always to allow the cow to what we called dry up. Why do we try to farm every inch of our land? Why do we not let cover crops? We called it, in the old Polish way, letting the land grow fallow for a while, that we have this rest time in the land, in ourselves. This is the lesson of valerian. It's a deep sedative. It's not like chamomile for the more just calming. It's a deep sedative to shut down the nervous system, to quell all of this kind of anxiety. I think that we are a culture, everything is 24/7. There's no rest, there's no darkness. I also want to bring in this image of Balder. That was actually, I did some research, and the word Valerian evolved from the word Baldrian, which means Balder, the Norse god of light. But Balder was killed by Loki with a mistletoe spear. And when he dies, this god of light had to descend to the goddess Hel, Hel, which is the same as Hades, and live in the damp, dark roots of the world tree. So we get this feeling of Balder as the light god who learns to live with darkness. I feel at last the world's reality, which lacking the communion of my soul would by itself be frosty, empty life, revealing it is powerless to recreate itself in souls, would itself find only death. We encounter this death as we move into the late November time. This is from the calendar of the soul. But knowing, as Balder did, that we are light beings, this is what the Michaelic iron gives us. And then if we then imagine the Valerian as giving us this inner light that will go into the darkness. And I do want to close with just this quick, and we can meditate more on this, that spikenard, which is related, very strongly related to the Valerian botanically, was that which was used to anoint the feet. It was a burial ritual. And that's even said here by this idea of the alabaster jar, which is phosphorescent and glows in the dark. This was the house, the sheath for the spikenard. And the alabaster was used for many sepulchral objects. So I just want to give us that feeling of how this plant belongs to the burial mysteries. And in fact, that's what Mark said. She did this for my burial, that when Mary Magdalene applied and poured the spikenard oil, and it was criticized as being extravagant by Judas, that Mark said, no, she did this for my burial. That is what was known about spikenard. And I would say that that is also belonging to the archetype of the Valerian, that it's this burial mystery, and that its sheath over the compost pile is to create that warmth that allows for the decay process. And so in closing, I just want to say that what we've done is we've taken a journey that included a consideration of the archangels, but we also have moved from the preps, imagining the oak bark to belong to the winter mysteries, the dandelion, the emergent spring, the chamomile, that higher in between spring and summertime, the summer heights of the yarrow, and then the autumn, that iron awakening of the nettle that Michael gives us, and then Valerian, this Saturn gift of warmth and a kind of dying that allows for the inner light, and that brings us back to the winter again. So, thank you.
Wow, Patricia, what a journey, what a beautiful journey. And I don't have much to add, but I want to recognize the beauty and artistry of the slides and the art that you shared with us, and what a significant portion of what you're bringing is that artistry as well. It's not only information, but it's imbued with the heart that you bring, the enthusiasm and warmth of your clear devotion to this practice. And I can only say, based on the comments that we've been getting, everyone else is delighted and so grateful for what you've just shared with us. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And Ben, just thank you for being the facilitator, initiator, host.
You bet.
It's a pleasure.
You
So thank
bet.
you.